Welcome to today's Awesome Marriage Podcast. Today, my special guest is Bryan Crum. He's a hospice chaplain. He's a speaker. He's a storyteller. He's the author of the new book, Neighbor, Love Yourself, Discover Your Value, Live Your Worth. It's an incredible book. I'm so happy to have him on the podcast today. I think you're going to really enjoy this and really how Bryan helps us see ourselves through God's eyes and what a difference that makes. Let's go to the studio right now. Bryan, welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. It's so good to have you here. I'm excited about our conversation that we're getting ready to have, and thank you. Thanks for saying yes.
Oh, I'm so honored to be with you, Dr. Kim. The wisdom and the example that you provide for marriage is so powerful, and I appreciate just what you keep putting out there in the world, because I know I'm listening and I'm definitely not alone, and it's just an honor to talk with you today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it certainly makes me a better husband. Or Nancy says it makes me a better husband. I don't think she'd ever let me quit.
I can relate to that statement for sure.
For sure. So kind of a little bit of background, people that don't know you real well, and then also your role as a hospital chaplain that you did for 10 years. Kind of share with us some of those things.
Yeah, I worked as a chaplain for over a decade. And it was just an incredible experience. It was equally rewarding and challenging and heartbreaking. I don't know how that math works out percentage wise, but just day to day, you don't know what you're walking into. And you go home often with heartbreak and victory all at the same time. But I still think my bigger privilege in life is that I am a husband and I'm a dad and I'm a son. God has just gifted me with this wonderful family. I'm just blessed, to be able to talk about things like marriage because I've got a good one. But I'm a speaker, I'm an author, and I like to tell folks I feel like I'm on a mission right now to help people fall in love with God's greatest creation. And that's us, after working so many years with folks that are confronting their mortality, I can tell you firsthand, not all of us love ourselves. And so that justifies my mission. I'm just here to help people fall in love with what God's made. So
I love that. I think we do. We don't embrace that enough. And our pastor challenged us. He was talking about just that we are a masterpiece, that we are God's creation and we're created for good works. And I think the more we embrace that, I think it just changed. It can help change it. God doesn't want us to feel bad about ourselves. Certainly there's conviction, but he forgives us. And then he wants much, much more for us than that.
Yeah, and I think had I not had this job, I wouldn't have discovered that. It's to sit one-on-one with people that are going through these final moments. It's a privilege, and it definitely is eye-opening because you watch as people that lived well and people that didn't, people that had big careers, people that struggled financially. You just meet all different folks, and something about it being the final hours just amplifies everything. So if you loved well in your life, you see that at the end. And if you struggled with regret and self-doubt, well, that comes on really strong for most of us at the end too. So
I don't think any of us at the end would talk about how much money we made or this accomplishment or this award. It really is about the people that God gives us to do life with, right?
Yeah, that's so true. Absolutely.
So what did that role teach you about? We talked a little bit about how people live, but how they believe, how they relate to others, and just to go into that just a little bit more.
It's kind of a strange way to say it, but I always see it as like an optometrist visit. Like when you go and visit the optometrist, they swing out those giant owl eyes. I think the technical term is a phoropter, but it's this thing where the optometrist just flips these lenses back and forth, and it helps us see the world a little differently. And you got to find the right lens. For me, this job working with people one-on-one like this, it was the right lens. It's helped me just see the world differently than I would have otherwise. When we we share a lot of the same needs. And I've been able to see that through this lens. We all want to be loved. We all want to know
Mm,
our time on this earth meant something. And we all have similar regrets and doubts. We'd like to think we're all unique in that way some days, but we all have those. And I think the piece that we miss the most, Dr. Ken, at least the ones I've seen, is that we don't know how valuable we are. I've
yeah.
discovered two truths about living, and it's that one, we're priceless,
Mm,
and second, for some reason, we've forgotten that truth. And so
yeah.
just we interact with people every day, but we don't treat them like they're incredibly valuable creatures all the time. And so I think the way we treat each other on the outside doesn't equate to how valuable each of us are on the inside.
Yeah. And I guess that's probably been an issue forever with people of just not realizing how we are. But I just think what I've seen in counseling people over the last 40 years is I think it's harder. I think there's more of that hits at us of telling us, no, you're not priceless. No, you're not a masterpiece, or that we
Yeah.
struggle that. Do you see that?
Yeah, I think that becomes kind of our primary role as counselors is reminding folks that you are, and kind of removing those barriers that we've built up over the years or that maybe other people have thrown in our path
Sure.
that have kept us from seeing it.
Yeah, I agree, and I think just comparisons and all those things that we do that takes us away from the truth of how God feels about us. And um, so, do you see people at the end come back to that or want to come back to it?
I it would be wonderful to say that all of us in that story with everything wrapped up in a nice bow, but the
Yeah,
truth is we carry with us what we've carried all along. We
yeah,
carry it to the end. I do see a lot of us that are able to kind of reconcile some of those unfinished businesses and the kind of the dilemmas we haven't quite solved. Some of those do come into focus, and we're able to have some resolution, and then sometimes we're not, and that's the I think the realization is that's okay too. God
yeah.
takes care of both of us, both situations. So
I can imagine you have some really interesting conversations with people that are facing the end of life.
yeah, absolutely. A lot of them related to how they were treated. Maybe they were treated by an earthly father really badly, who never
Mm.
loved them, never saw the value in them. And when a guy like me shows up and says, "Hey, our heavenly Father loves us," that's a little hard to take when your earthly
Yeah.
father didn't. So,
Yes.
kind of sorting through some of those things.
Yeah, I think it is. If your earthly father was abusive or whatever like that, like you were saying, and then we talk about God as father, it's like, wait a minute, that's not
Yeah,
how I experienced that position in
for
my life.
sure.
So stuff to think about. So you say God loves us, we don't live ourselves. Talk to me more about how do we love ourselves, and what does the Bible say about that?
Yeah, great perspective for sure. There's a disconnect between what we're actually worth and what we believe we're worth.
Mm,
And I think it's hard for us to believe, but if you could somehow pull back the layers of our physicality and take a peek at our price tag, you wouldn't discover any numbers there. We'd find one simple word, a name written on our price tag. It would
mm,
just say Jesus, because that's what we're worth to God. We're worth the life of Jesus. But I
yeah,
don't know if you're like me, our earthly ears, like considering ourselves to be worth the life of Jesus, that just doesn't set well with my ears, and it sounds egotistical to talk
mm,
about loving ourselves, or maybe even just egotistical. Feels like it's something that's not from God. But I keep reminding myself on this journey that in heaven, how much we're worth is common knowledge. I think God and heaven and the angels, they understand how much was paid for God's creation to be redeemed. And when we acknowledge how much that we're worth, we really acknowledge a truth that heaven knows well. So,
yeah,
um,
yes,
learning loving ourselves and learning to love ourselves. It's not really ego. It's just
Yes.
learning and starting to understand how God really feels about us.
Yeah, and I think it's just so many distractions in life that take us away from that,
Yeah, agreed.
and it makes it a little harder for us to get there for sure.
It does. It does. And I Jesus knew it. I think he's introduced that idea to us. He holds this standard. He tells us to love others, but the standard for that is how much we love ourselves. And boy, that's a tough place to start. But that's what there's a third part to that greatest command. It's loving ourselves.
Yeah,
And I think the reason is when we understand our worth, we start to discover the worth inside the people around us. So
absolutely. One of the things that made me think of in counseling, so many times I'll work with someone and they're going through a difficult time, and I'll ask them. I said, did you feel like your spouse forgave you? Well, yeah. Does God forgive you? Yes. So have you forgiven yourself? And it's like, no, I can't
no,
get there, or it's just like we can't get there. And I think it's a hard thing a lot of times for us to do that for
yeah,
probably for many reasons.
I think so too. And we can see it in ourselves as quote unquote professional counselors.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to see how others see that too.
And I think it is that what you said about the fact that as we can see that more in ourselves, I think we can see that more in others. And that is, I read John Maxwell's latest book, I guess last year, and when he talks about, I know he's probably talked about it before, about looking to see the value in every person, that really hit me, and I think it made a
Yeah,
real impact on me to realize everybody that I encounter every day has value, and
yeah,
but it's harder for me to say that I have value. It's like,
yeah,
yeah, I can see it in all of them, but and to know that we really do, we have that value.
yeah. I don't know if it was different back in Jesus' day with Jewish society or civilizations, but it sure feels harder today. It really does. It just feels like that ego thing creeping up all the time.
I think it is, and I think we live in such a competitive society, and all those things that fall into it.
Yeah.
So if someone's listening, they're saying, "Okay, how do we? How do I learn to love myself? What are some practical ways to do it? And then, are we really doing it?"
Yeah, it's a tall order for a lot of us. It really is. And I was reading John Maxwell too. We must have been on the same wavelength because I've been reading his stuff too. And one thing he said kind of applies ironically to this question because you get a big thing that you're trying to tackle, and he says it's like having a giant tree that you're trying to chop down, and if you just go out and you keep taking 5 swings at that thing every day with the same axe,
Yeah,
you're gonna get it eventually. And it feels that way sometimes, but I think the small steps start to add up if we start to do that. And I think the first step is stop comparing ourselves to each
mm.
other. We're all on the same road, but we are certainly at different mile markers, and some of us have taken some exit ramps.
Yes,
We're not in the same spot, and that's okay. But I've learned that there's just this power in giving each other the benefit of the doubt. I definitely in
mm.
my marriage, I have learned that.
Yeah,
Um, there's always more to the story, I think, than we first hear. It kind of, you remember the Ronald Reagan thing, trust but verify?
yes,
That's back a bit, but I think our motto is more like assume and maybe verify later or something. But if we
absolutely.
could get back to that trust but verify, I think it serves us well because that just giving each other grace is this small step that covers this huge distance. And
Oh
I've
yeah,
just watched too many of us struggle with regret, with embracing our true value. Yeah, usually because of something that happened in our past that we've not given ourselves grace or given someone else grace for.
yeah. That whole back to forgiving ourselves or forgiving someone else, or I think sometimes we hold on to unforgiveness just because I don't know. Maybe we feel like it still gives us power over that person, or that if we forgive them, they won't realize how serious it was or how much they hurt us and things like that.
Yeah,
And yet, when we do forgive, there's so much freedom in it.
there is. And it's definitely a self thing. I would often tell folks, Jesus didn't die for who you are now or who you're going to be. He died for you while you're in the middle of making those mistakes, the ones you're so hung up on. And it's just this truth we've got to learn to embrace. We can't add any more worth to our lives. And
Yeah.
Jesus doesn't need to die a second time. All of that's been paid.
Right.
So,
Yeah, yeah. I heard one guy say one time he was talking to somebody that just, well, how could God forgive me for that? And he said, Jesus doesn't need to crawl up on the cross one more time for that. That's already been done. And it's so true. It's so true.
yeah.
I mean, but we feel like we're worse than everybody else, or that we're so hard on ourselves sometimes.
Yeah, it's not that we need more redeeming, just we need to understand the redemption we already have. It's
Yeah, and
it's
embrace
true.
that. I love what you said too. That is for most of us, it's going to be a process, isn't it? It's not like one day we're going to wake up and go, "Oh my gosh, I get it." Maybe. I mean, God could do that, but it seems like It seems like it's a process for most of us. Do you agree?
I do. I if that happens in one day, I'm still waiting for that day
Yeah,
because
I know.
it hasn't happened for me. It has to be this process. I think, we have to grow a little bit each day, or and that's the only way it happens, I think.
Yeah, and we're going to have something may happen to me a week from now that may knock me back a little bit. Doesn't mean I'm back ground zero again, but I got to recover from that and begin to move on. So I agree. I see it as a probably for most of us a lifelong process
Yeah.
of realizing that until we get to heaven, and then I think it'll be pretty easy to do once we're there. We'll just
Yeah.
see things in a different light than we do now.
Probably so. Yeah. That's right.
So let's talk about marriage. How
Sure.
does this change relationships, and specifically how does it change marriages?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think it applies heavily. If you think about, I always think marriage is promising each other that we're all in, that
Mm,
we're going to learn more and more about each other's faults. And no matter what we learn, we aren't going to run away. And, uh, I'm not talking about a spouse that's abusive. That's maybe a different conversation. I'm
right.
simply saying, for most of us, we're promising that we're going to love each other's worst parts, the worst, absolute worst about our partners. We're going to embrace, and that to me sounds really good as a wedding vow and a ceremony. But the truth is, it's hard and it's painful, and I think there's a reason that the Bible calls the church Jesus's bride, because
Mm,
Jesus says, I'm all in. I love this group of people no matter what. And it's such an example to us because, we're not the best group of people to love some days.
no,
And he sticks with us. And I think that's it. That's how it applies to our marriages, is that we've got to make that conscious choice to say, I'm still here. I'm not running away no matter what I learn about you.